Okay, so we can start. Hi, everyone. You're back with Toxic Tangents. Today, we are going to talk about fertility travel. With us today, we have Andrew Kautz, the founder of international fertility company, IFC, as our special guest. And as usual, we have Joe Rochester, our Chief Scientific Officer, Chris Ribbons, our Head of People, Jiaxin Fan, our producer, and myself, founder of Million Marker. So first off, thank you, Andrew, so much for making the time to do this podcast with us. I know you have a very impressive background, not only in everything fertility, but also in law, education, and marketing. So can you introduce yourself to our audience and your company?
Yes, of course. My name is Andrew Kautz. I'm the Chief Executive of the International Fertility Company. You're quite right. I've got a mixed background. I qualified in law many years ago. This for a short period, went into academia and tried my hand at lecturing, and then settled into marketing before establishing the International Fertility Company.
Wow, that's a lot. What leads you to start International Fertility Company? We're always interested in founder's journey, and how was the International Fertility Company created?
Yeah, so many years ago now, I was a former fertility patient. Very fortunately, my partner and I were lucky to have two daughters. So I had a sort of a bit of a knowledge and issues around sort of infertility, but didn't really sort of act upon it, I suppose, until sort of later in life and later into my career. About 10 years ago, I was asked to join a not-for-profit organisation in the UK called Fertility Network Uk as a sort of a business development role. And I worked with them for about 4 years and basically visited a lot of clinics worldwide from the patient perspective, got interested in the different ways that clinics offered care in different countries, and then thought it may be a good idea to set up an independent organisation, which IFC became, to advise patients who were considering travelling for fertility treatment.
Oh, wow. So where does IFC operate today? You mentioned like many clinics in the world, how many countries, like clinics do you actually work with?
Yeah, so we've got quite an extensive network now. Prior to setting up IFC, I did a lot of travelling. So I've probably visited over 150 clinics worldwide to get a good grounding of what was available for patients. In the last 4 years or so, we've sort of widened the network for IFC. So now we have 3 country locations. So we have office space and clinical space in London. We have office space in the Netherlands and also small office space in New York. We cover, I think it's 16 countries at the moment, and we've got a working network of around about 100 fertility clinics.
Wow, that's really, really impressive. Okay, then let's dive into fertility tourism. So could you tell our audience what is fertility tourism? Why do people choose to travel for fertility treatment?
Yeah, of course. So fertility tourism simply is when someone travels from their resident country to another for fertility treatment. So it's part of the wider sort of medical tourism. I suppose that it put simply. In terms of why people travel, multitudes of reasons, really. Strangely enough, it's been very, very difficult when we set up IFC to get a realistic number of people who travel. That's one of the problems we had from the very beginning, was actually try to sort of ascertain true numbers of people who travel. Anecdotally, we know that the numbers are large, but very, very difficult to quantify, really. We set up the IFC really to sort of satisfy that sort of need for people. From the beginning, probably 4 or 5 years ago, the main reason for people traveling was that they had either had unsuccessful fertility treatment in their own country, and they couldn't get access to treatment which worked, or they were really at the end of their fertility journey. For one reason or another, they had tried, various treatments, and they were unsuccessful in their own country. And fertility tourism really was seen at that point as a sort of the last throw of the dice. It's now or never. Well, we'll try another country, we'll try another treatment. This work, that's the end of the line. But fertility tourism is sort of evolved even in the last 4 or 5 years. We're seeing now younger patients travel, and patients traveling further distances. So we're not getting that sort of patient who is 38, 40 and above, desperately looking for that last treatment. We're now seeing patients as young as 18, 20, looking for fertility options in different countries.
Oh, wow. That young. I actually have a friend in the US. He and his wife went to Thailand for their fertility treatment. One is because they love to travel and they like to visit Thailand. And second is also in Thailand is a lot cheaper than the US.
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, we're finding patients, for instance, in the UK, traveling to places like India and South Africa. So you're looking at sort of 8 hours, 10 hours by plane. We're also getting patients from Australia who are coming into Europe. We do a lot of work in Malaysia as well, and again, a lot of patients are travelling there. So yes, we're seeing more patients travelling a lot further now.
Are there a lot of cost differences between different countries? People getting different treatment in different countries?
Yeah, there are. So I mean, sort of the one end of the spectrum, I suppose, you have the US, where treatment costs, private treatment costs tend to be one of the highest in the world. And if you look at sort of IVF with womb gametes, for instance, and IVF with donated, you're probably looking at sort of Central Europe, 50% of the cost of those in the US. And within Central Europe, there are some countries that offer prices that are even cheaper than that. So you can make substantial sort of savings if you do travel.
I see. What about the success rate? Because I know people also care if they do IVF. Success rate is also very important. If they involves like egg extraction and all these things.
Yeah, of course. Really, with a lot of clinics now, because they're well equipped, they have the most up-to-date technologies available, they have really experienced medics and embryologists. And amongst those sort of leading clinics, there's not a huge great difference between across the board. So we find now when we're advising patients, we always say, success rates are obviously important to some people, and we found success rates are more important for younger patients than older patients, for instance. So success rates are important, but they're not the sort of the main driver for a lot of patients.
I see.
And what we do say is that certainly do take a look at success rates, but there's not a huge difference between the leading clinics in big differences are the package of care that treatments offer, the sort of the care package post-treatment that clinics offer. So there are subtle differences between clinics, but the differences between success rates in the leading clinics isn't.
I see. I see. So what are you talked about the care packages and then different packages that different clinics offer. What are some components of these packages? And then, if someone wants to choose fertility tourism, what should they be looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we offer at IFC, which is I think which has been really attractive for patients, is that we offer a lot of pre-travel tests and scans. So a patient would contact us or a clinic directly, for instance, would work out exactly the treatment that was required. The clinic would devise a sort of the beginning of the treatment process and identify a number of tests and scans that patient would require as part of that process. And what we're able to do with IFC, with our number of locations now, is that we offer those tests and scans before a patient travels, which is great for patients because they can have all of the tests in their home country, send those off to the country in which they travel, and then they reduce the time that they spend away from home. So that's one sort of care package element that we offer, which I think is quite attractive for patients. But equally, depending on the clinic that you go to, they do tend to sort of incorporate wellness packages into their medical treatments, for instance. So many countries offer pre and post-treatment access to things like acupuncture, reflexology, sort of elements that are really well regarded by patients. Another clinics go a little bit further, and they offer sort of care packages and post-treatment when the patient returns home. So some of the negative feedback, for instance, we've had in the past from patients who travel is that they've gone to a country, they've had their treatment, they've gone home, and all of a sudden they feel lost. There's no connection and no communication between them and the clinic where they've had the treatment. So a lot of clinics now are providing an additional services where they're giving a care package to the patient when they return home, so that the patient can then have access to further counselling, further coaching, any sort of medical support they need, and when they return home.
Wow, it's really impressive. That's a lot of services and a lot of support. And I guess the journey is quite complicated. And would it be possible to, walk us through, say, if I'm going to become a new customer of IFC, what would be the journey look like, from when I enter the office of IFC until, I return from my treatment back home?
Yeah, of course. So we did, I should have perhaps mentioned at the start, because there was a lack of sort of available research about fertility tourism, we conducted a big fertility tourism survey last year in the midst of the pandemic. And we spoke to over 500 patients about the various drivers, what motivated them to travel. And there were lots of interesting conclusions that came out of the survey. One of the most interesting ones was that patients are now taking more proactive measures to identify the clinics that they're interested in themselves. So 45% of those patients that we spoke to, for instance, would look and do some sort of searches online and identify potential clinics and treatments before actually speaking to the treatment centres themselves. That's a complete, a big change from what's happened over the last couple of years or so. So that's the first thing I would say, is that many patients now do their own research. So the time they come to IFC, or by the time they do come to a clinic, they're well versed in their particular diagnosis, the treatment options that are available to them. And the vast majority of them who do come to IFC know in their own minds what they're looking for, and the difficulty is actually identifying the most appropriate treatment centre for their requirements. And that's where they get a bit stuck in the sense that there is so much choice out there now. And you know yourself, you can spend hours searching for anything specific on the net. And invariably patients come to us and say, well, look, this is our diagnosis, this is the treatment that we want. Can you sort of give us a short list of centres in different countries that we can then take another look at we can choose at 1 or 2, and then we'll come back to you again for some affirmation or your views about the centre. So really, we're signposting people, but ultimately we're giving that sort of choice to the patients themselves. They ultimately choose which centre they want to go to.
I see. So once they choose, they figure out which center they're going to go to. Does IFC also help them arrange travel? And then once they get there, get in touch with the clinic, and then obviously after they come back.
We do to a certain extent, and most of the clinics that we work with have a sort of quite extensive experience of working with international patients. Most of them have at least one dedicated person within the clinic who looks after the international people. So within their sort of remit, ordinarily, they would advise on accommodation, advise on that sort of thing. But in the absence of that person, then we certainly would.
I see. Are there some common concerns about fertility travel that you have seen, patients expressed?
Yeah, I think especially the major one that we came across in our survey was a worry about sort of communication and language. So the vast majority of people came back and said, look, we're quite confident about travelling, but when it comes to sort of medical sort of intervention, we're a bit worried about sort of communication and whether our needs will be understood, and will we be able to talk to the medical team in a particular clinic. But again, from our experience, those clinics that have international patients have a number of people within the clinic who can speak a number of languages. So we try then to sort of allay any fears that might have. But so language is certainly one. The other issue that people always ask us about is how regulated clinics are. So are they visited, for instance, by an independent body to make sure that the success rates they quote are accurate and true? Are they inspected to ensure they provide a certain level of care and quality? So those questions about sort of if there's an adequate framework in place for the clinic to be regulated, and that's obviously another concern that people have. And then one about success rates. We're all constantly asked, are the sort of published success rates in the clinic might sort of illustrate on the website, are they completely accurate? So those, I suppose, those are sort of 3 areas really that we're asked about most often.
How do you answer patients regarding particularly the standards of the clinics? Because I'm assuming each country is different, and in terms of regulation.
Yeah, so I suppose that's where sort of my personal sort of legal background comes in to a certain extent. We've got sort of a knowledge of sort of the frameworks which exist in those individual countries. And really speaking, most of those sort of advanced countries that have got a number of clinics that serve international patients are the ones that are most highly regulated. So, for instance, the US, Canada, the UK, Spain, those countries that have got a good track record and history of treating international patients are all highly regulated. And they're all of the clinics are independent. Success rates are generally sort of accurate. So those sorts of countries that have got sort of infrastructure in place to reassure patients.
What about country like India and Central Europe as well as Asia?
So again, we have started to deal with a number of countries where historically we didn't work. And so India is one of them, a perfect example, and some of the countries in East Europe we never used to work with, but they've become popular destinations for patients. And there are some countries that perhaps lack that sort of highly regulated infrastructure compared to countries like the US and the UK and some European countries. But I think there are certain countries in Eastern Europe where more work should be done. And that's something that we always advise our patients to look for, just to make sure that those independent clinics have been certified, have been independently sort of checked and regulated. But yeah, there are a number of countries that, again, we advise patients to be careful and to do their research. And if they've got any sort of gaps in that research, to come back to us with specific questions. There are differences, obviously, between different countries.
Quite complicated. So do you have any tips for people who are planning to travel for their fertility treatments? So maybe give them top 5 tips that you would have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is obviously be prepared. So there's a lot of information out there, whether it may be sort of remote information obtained from the net, or directly from clinics or organisations like IFC. And what I would always say to patients is that fertility tourism is a big investment. Any form of fertility treatment can be very costly. So try to avoid any additional costs wherever possible. So when you're sort of looking for advice about different countries or different clinics, if you're looking for independent advice, I would recommend that you don't pay any money for it. There are a number of organisations out there like ourselves that provide free information to patients. So I'd certainly wouldn't advise to a patient any additional money on top of treatment for independent advice. So I think to be prepared. Also, I think it's, if at all possible, we always suggest to patients the most important thing, I think, when choosing a clinic, as I said, some people it's costs, for some people it's success rates, but for an awful lot of people, it's sort of a gut feeling that they get when they talk to a clinician or a nurse within a clinic. So what we always advise patients to do is, if you can't visit a clinic before treatment, certainly make some arrangements to have some online communication with to talk to the team that might be responsible for your care, talk to clinicians wherever possible. And you get, I'm sure, you get a feeling for a clinic, or you get a feeling for a particular team who are responsible for your care. So again, be prepared to invest some time and potentially some resources to make that choice a lot easier. Have a look at the sort of the legal structure in different countries, because obviously, apart from having regulations in place to make sure that clinics act responsibly, lots of countries have different laws regarding what patients can be treated. So, for instance, if you're a single woman, you may not receive treatment in certain countries. If you're a same-sex couple, there are a number of countries that don't offer treatment. So again, take a look at the types of treatment that are offered, depending upon your particular circumstances. And another one, going back to costs, which is very important, is that try to get an accurate quote for the treatment that you're looking for. Because again, many clinics have had experiences of patients that come back to us and said, look, we turned up at a clinic expecting to pay this amount, and then the clinic advised us that we should have an add-on and a different add-on and a different add-on. And we've ended up paying 50% more than we thought we would. So again, it's trying to get sort of an accurate figure from clinics about how much you're likely to pay for that particular treatment.
Wow, very practical advice. Has COVID impacted much of IFC's business, as well as the internet travel for fertility treatment?
So yeah, so in terms of travel, obviously here in Europe, like everywhere else, borders have been shut down, so patients have not been able to travel. So on one hand, we've had issues where patients have had treatment paused or cancelled, which has obviously caused a lot of anxiety and frustration. So that part of the business for IFC stopped, effectively stopped up until the last month, where we've seen slight movements of patients. But our business model supports sort of two principles really. On one side, we have our patient support function, and that's sort of advising patients about travel and helping them find appropriate treatment centres. But equally, we work with products and we work with clinics directly. So we advise clinics and products about sort of cross-border collaborations, how they may effectively promote themselves, how they may effectively develop communication to patients. So that side of the business hasn't stopped for us. We've spent the last year sort of helping clinics and products communicate to patients. And then sort of on the patient support side, we've had a lot of work that we've been doing, sort of advising patients and advising them on sort of when treatments and when travel may start again. So one part of the business has been busy and the other part has been quite quiet. But we're beginning now to see movement. Even in the last week, we've had a number of patients that have travelled within Europe, for instance. So we're beginning to see things moving once again.
Great. Do you know? Do you have any tips for people who are just particularly on travel tips for people who are thinking about getting their treatment internationally?
I suppose it's very similar to as it was pre-pandemic, really. The only difference we found is that we're making sure that people, where required, have access to PCR tests, for instance. So we're working, for instance, with a couple of companies that provide quick turnarounds in terms of PCR tests. So that's an added complication now that at the moment, anyway, patients have got to factor in, and associated costs with those PCR tests. We're also finding at the moment, obviously, availability of flights sometimes it's difficult. So again, you have to look on a regular basis to different areas for availability of. Accommodation wise, again, depending upon the country that you're traveling to, there may well be issues. UK, for instance, patients travelling into the UK at the moment have to quarantine and access to hotels and accommodation at the moment is a little restricted. It looks as though that's going to be lifted once again in the next month or so. And Europe just a little way behind the UK in that sense.
Makes sense. Yeah, we actually got several questions from our customers or anyone who's interested in our service, because environmental toxins is everywhere, toxics everywhere, lifestyle factors impact IVF. So some of the question we got is that, people ask us if there are any travel tip, how to avoid environmental toxic chemicals while you're traveling. So we're actually putting together a blog and we're hoping to be released along with this podcast episode to people to, any suggestions that can help them reduce these exposures while they're traveling, particularly when they're traveling for fertility. So we'll have that released.
I think that will be really useful. Again, that's something that we've had those sorts of requests, increasing number over the last year or so. So I think that'll be a really useful resource.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So I have one question for you, Andrew. I'm kind of curious. You mentioned that the cost in the US is among the most expensive. So in what cases would people from other countries consider coming to the US for treatment?
So we have, in our experience, we've had a number of different patient groups access treatments in the US. For instance, with IVF and using their own gametes and IVF using those of a donor, we tend to have patients who are older, who are interested in accessing well-regulated, good clinics who aren't that as concerned about treatment costs looking at the US. That's one group of patients. They're more interested in the quality of the care and quality of the treatment they're going to receive. as one group. We also have a lot of intended parents who are looking for. So again, the options in Europe, for instance, the options you're having with surrogacy, for instance, in the UK, there's no commercial surrogacy. So surrogacy options at the moment are fairly limited. So if someone wants to begin that surrogacy process, they have to. And on one hand, you can go to Eastern Europe for surrogacy, or the other option is to go to the US, Canada, and South America. US is a popular consideration for people who are looking for surrogacy options. Also because of the fact that you can have gender selection in a lot of the in the US, and that's not available in the vast majority of countries in Europe. Again, you may have an instance where either a couple going through IVF with eggs, for instance, or a couple who are looking to be in that surrogacy process, who are very keen on being able to select gender, will travel.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yes, why I was looking into adoption surrogacy for my own fertility struggles, that we also got pretty educated on the whole surrogacy process, and I was quite impressed how mature the surrogacy process is in the US. It's almost you already have a playbook. You just need to follow through the process, even though it's overwhelming, but you can just go through it, and then you can be successful.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, it's one of the things we mentioned at the beginning about the different costs of treatment. And in the area of surrogacy, the difference between, for instance, the surrogacy costs in the US and surrogacy costs in somewhere like Ukraine or Russia, and there's a huge difference in cost. You're potentially looking, for instance, a couple go to Ukraine and start that surrogacy process, they would probably pay 25–30% of the costs of that in the US. But we're still finding intended parents still travel to the US, even though the costs are that much more expensive than they would be in some of the East European countries. I suppose it's an indication really of the way that surrogacy arranged in the US, that the track record, the clinics, the agencies that work in the country are very experienced, and that comes through in their sort of communication, their websites and marketing materials, and patients have confidence to travel into the US for surrogacy.
Oh wow. Yeah. Anybody have any other question for Andrew?
It was extremely informative. It's an area I didn't know much about at all. And so, your answers are very knowledgeable and informative, and I would encourage anyone, who is interested in this fertility travel to contact you and contact your company and get those answers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess this is also a good opportunity for our audience. If they want to get in touch with you, what would be a good way to get in touch with IFC and get in touch with Andrew? Yeah, with you.
Yeah, so the website is internationalfertilitycompany.com. The best way to get in touch by email is andrew@internationalfertilitycompany.com. And again, as I said, we're based in London primarily, but we've got the base here in the US. So I would say, just as a rule of thumb, 40% of our patients are from the UK. So the vast majority of our patients are non-UK patients who are just invested in travel anywhere in the world, really. So we're not just a sort of a UK or Europe-centric organization. So wherever you're based and you want information about travel or treatment options, we'll happily help you. And as I said, all information and advice given to patients is completely free of charge.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Yes, for everyone, if you want to get in touch, please visit IFC's website or get in touch with Andrew, and you'll get lots of good information. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to ask, or I'll stop recording?
Well, that was really great, Andrew.
Yeah.
Really, really informative.
Thank you.
Okay, I will stop recording and then, all right.